Recep Tayyip Erdogan is back as Turkey's president for 5 years as a Sunday runoff poll ended in his clear victory. It was almost predicted after his party did well in the parliamentary election and he approached victory in the 14 May presidential election as well. But it was also the first election Erdogan needed a runoff to secure a clear win, indicating growing doubts about his effectiveness and authority. Indian women wrestlers' protest against the Wrestling Federation chief over sexual harassment charges took an unexpected turn on Sunday. While Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated a new parliament building, his police threw the wrestlers out of their protest site. Deprived of a place to protest, how will they continue their struggle? And in the United States, the Joe Biden administration and the Republicans have come to an agreement about the debt ceiling. That is, they have decided how hard to squeeze American citizens for the next roughly 1 decade. These are the stories today in Daily Debrief. Authoritarian President Erdogan's return to power was questioned as Turkey reeled from crisis to crisis in recent years. It confronted economic shocks and a devastating earthquake, and it is divided over refugees and the quest for acceptance in the European Union. What explains Erdogan's success in this election and what factors somewhat tempered the enthusiasm for him? Prashant from People's Dispatch joins us in the studio with more details. Prashant, would you like to begin by talking about what happened in this election?
Right. So it was kind of bound to happen in some senses, I think, because even the first round of elections showed that the polling before the first round, it indicated that Kılıçdaroğlu, the opposition candidate, was in fact in the lead. And so there was a lot of anticipation that maybe this was the end of Erdogan's regime and all that. But when the first round of results came out, Erdogan did have a comfortable lead, and there was a decent amount of difference between the two. And the third person who came third, the candidate who came third, extended his support to Erdogan as well. And I think also considering the fact that the parliamentary majority was also for the Justice Party, which is Erdogan's party, it seemed increasingly likely that he would have a better chance at winning the election. And that's pretty much exactly what happened. I think there was no real, as far as the opposition candidate was concerned, they were not really been able to sort of bring about that extent of enthusiasm and that extent of a coalition which could have unseated Erdogan in the elections. And I think that was evident at the first round itself. It was a trend that was confirmed further in the second round. So in some ways, I think no real surprise there over the results. The only, like I said, most considering that the previous round pretty much already determined it, because I think if that vast shift were to be there, it would have been visible in the first round itself. It clearly was not. So despite the fact that Erdogan has had a very to say bleak record, to say the least, the huge amount of inflation, the kind of centralization of power, the attacks on democracy and opponents, and all those aspects, the fact remains that he still managed to sort of consolidate or bring together his supporters at least enough to gain a victory. So he's definitely in power for about at least 5 more years.
Right.
That's what all indications are, and he has a decent parliamentary majority as well. So I think it's a sort of continuation for the policies which Erdogan has been executing all this while, both on the political and economic fronts. So we're not going to see most likely not going to see any major change in how Turkey is panning out right as of now.
A continuation, but what does that continuation mean for different sections of Turkish people, for the region? And also, would the alternative have made a very big difference?
So I'll come to the second question first. Like the Turkish Communist Party has released a statement after the elections, and it actually kind of criticizes the opposition precisely for that point. The fact that they were not really able to come up with a positive, constructive and comprehensive enough alternative to Erdogan. They were not able to present that to the people. And I think even in an interview we did with one of the members of the TKP, he pointed out that every time Erdogan was in a bit of a spot, the opposition somehow ended up rescuing him in various ways. So the opposition, as arguably also bears a lot of responsibility for what has happened in Turkey. And you can argue that, for instance, in the realm of international affairs, in certain aspects, the opposition could have been worse. For instance, in the Ukraine war, we must admit that Erdogan has played a far more balanced role than what Turkey is traditionally known for. Traditionally, right. Turkey was a NATO ally. Was far more, say, amenable to US pressure and US interests. Erdogan has taken a far more different position at this point of time, and he's offered to serve as a mediator at various points. In fact, Turkey did serve as a mediator at the beginning of the war as well. So there is an argument to be made that Erdogan in this position is actually probably, in some ways helps the possibility of peace in the future, for instance.
Okay.
Because he is at least, Turkey at least is present as some kind of a mediator of some sorts. But if, for instance, if you look at, say, and also we need to understand the fact that Erdogan has over time shifted a bit in his position and been more open to negotiations with regional powers. There is far more of a regional rapprochement process that is taking place. We know that Saudi Arabia, Syria, Turkey, Qatar, all these players, many of whom were in positions of conflict with each other, are increasingly sort of willing to talk. Iran also. So, and Erdogan has been part of this process. So that's also an interesting trend that we need to sort of, register the fact that if an opposition candidate had won and was far more open to US influence, would they have ratcheted up the conflict with, say, Iran, or made things worse in the region, is a very important question to consider. At the same time, let's also kind of admit the fact that under Erdogan, Turkey's direction has been quite problematic, to say the least. I mean, like I said, there has been a massive centralization of powers. The president under it's become more of a presidential rule, and it was sanctified as such in 2017. Right. And also the fact that he's part of this Islamist project, which seeks to sort of, convert or transform Turkish society and move away from the secularism and republicanism that were hallmarks of Turkey earlier. And he and his party have definitely sought to change that. In terms of economic policies, it has been very neoliberal. A few capitalist houses have really benefited. Workers really suffering. Inflation has peaked. Workers have really struggled over the past many years. So all that is very much the classic, what you would call neoliberal textbook. Erdogan has often followed that in various ways. Health professionals have suffered a lot, for instance. And in each of these cases, in addition to the economic woes suffered by workers, there has also been political repression on opponents, on trade unions, Absolutely. For instance. All that has continued. So, this big question also about refugees and the Syria crisis. We know that Erdogan escalated the Syria crisis massively. A number of occasions, Turkish troops actually worsening the condition in Syria, participating in that war. We don't know what position he'll take now, because the question of Syrian refugees was a big issue during the election campaign. The opposition could have been worse here, because the opposition candidate kept saying that he would expel all the refugees, whereas the government has more been in favor of what is called voluntary repatriation, and for that has been seeking to take over Syrian lands. So all of this is very muddled right now. We need to see, how some of these situations develop. But, it's I wouldn't say that the opposition coming to power would have been in any way better. It would have probably brought itself, it would have probably meant a bit more liberalization in Turkey in terms of the political climate. Okay. But in the regional dynamic could have probably become much worse for all you know. So it's a really mixed bag.
All right, Prashant, thanks a lot for joining us. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi hogged the limelight during the Sunday inauguration of a new parliament building. But while he sang praises to Indian democracy, dozens of protesting wrestlers were harshly evicted from their protest site. The women wrestlers accused the Wrestling Federation chief of sexual harassment, including one who was a minor during the alleged crimes. But instead of effective action, the government has stalled. On Sunday, the police, which is directly under the Prime Minister's party's government, dragged them into buses, detained them and charged them with rioting. The wrestlers were stopped from marching towards Parliament with their growing band of supporters. Surangya from People's Dispatch has been writing about this protest. She joins us now over video conference. Surangya, thanks for joining us. Now, Surangya, you've been to the protest, you've visited the people, you've talked to the people involved with the protest and who are also supporting it. It's a very curious situation. The government doesn't seem to care that everybody thinks they're anti-women, the way they've removed the protesters from the site. Why do you think the government just doesn't seem to care at all about the perception it's creating?
So, Pragya, I don't think the irony was lost on anyone yesterday on the events that took place. On one hand, we had the Prime Minister inaugurating the new parliament, calling it the Temple of Democracy, while on the streets of Delhi, barely 2 kilometers away from this new parliament building, you could see the real state of Indian democracy. Of course, you've talked about the protest that has been going on at Jantar Mantar for the past over a month, I think nearly 40 days now, against Brij Bhushan Singh, who is the president of the Wrestling Federation of India, who is a member of parliament from the ruling BJP, who the wrestlers have alleged has sexually molested and harassed 7 women wrestlers, including one minor. And for this, to raise these issues, the protesters had been sitting in protest, and to raise these issues, they had called for a women's parliament to be held yesterday at the same time that the Prime Minister was inaugurating this new parliament building. Thousands were expected to gather yesterday, including from neighboring states of Punjab and Haryana and even Rajasthan, I think. And all of these farmers' bodies, women's bodies, student organizations, all of them had expressed solidarity and had made their intentions clear that they were going to come and participate in this women's parliament that the wrestlers had called for. But the previous night itself, borders to the city were sealed, and farmer leaders, women leaders reported that there was barricading done right outside their areas and homes so that they couldn't leave at all. And even in the morning, when the few people who did manage to leave, when they did reach the borders, they were not allowed to enter the city, and they were detained from there itself. And when we talk about what was happening inside the city, it was a different environment altogether. The entire city was barricaded. So while on my way from my home to Jantar Mantar, I came across barricades every few meters. The roads were entirely deserted. There was heavy police presence everywhere. And when you reach central Delhi, there was basically no way to get even close to the protest site, even if you're going on foot as an individual. There was heavy police presence, and they were just not allowing anyone through any route that could get you to Jantar Mantar, the protest site where the wrestlers were sitting. And what was astonishing was the fact that even media persons were not being allowed, while the more mainstream media houses, they had been given permission. They, those which are quite evidently reporting sort of, bias towards the government. The smaller media house outlets, independent media outlets like Newsclick, like People's Dispatch, they were not being allowed to reach the protest site either. So, I mean, this was just complete, blatant violation of all democratic principles. And, when we talk about what was happening at Jantar Mantar, early morning itself, even, individual leaders, when they were trying to get there, they were walking towards the site as individuals. There was Section 144, which was imposed by the police, which basically bars gathering of more than 4 people. But even as individuals were trying to, approach the site, trying to walk towards the site, they were being picked up. And then the attack on the protest site happened. Around 100 protesters had managed to gather there. All of them, including the wrestlers, were brutally detained. Those images are there for everyone to see. They were badly manhandled by the police, including the women. And the entire protest site was emptied out. The police just filled up the protesters by the busloads and took them away. And any group that, tried to reach Jantar Mantar was picked up on the way or wherever the barricades were. And according to reports, a total of 700 protesters were detained by the Delhi police yesterday. The protest site was emptied out. The police dismantled, the tents and the stage that had been set up at Jantar Mantar by the organizers. And now they have charged the wrestlers who had been leading these protests, including, Vinesh Fogart, Sakshi Malik, Bajrang Punia, among others, with rioting, among other things, even though it was a completely peaceful movement, They were just sitting there and they were just, attempting to march towards parliament, trying to raise their demands. And now the police has said that, we're not going to allow you to return to Jantar Mantar to continue your.
Surangya, what have the protesters been saying about back to the protest, which the government obviously is not keen to see them come back? So, it's not just the chief of the, wrestling federation, but the government itself seems to be very sexist in its approach. How are the wrestlers going to tackle it going on from now?
Exactly. That's what I was coming to. During all this, where was the accused? We see the wrestlers who, who are the victims here, who are the survivors here, who are trying to raise their voice for justice. They're the ones being punished. But Bhujan Singh was just sitting inside the new parliament, attending the inauguration. So it's basically quite clear what, the Modi-led government, BJP government feels when it comes to gender justice. And the wrestlers have, made the intentions clear that they are planning to resist, continue their resistance. Vinesh Fogart had earlier stated that even if it comes to, even if it comes at the stake of their careers, even if they have to give up their sporting careers, if it could mean a better future for the female athletes of tomorrow, they will continue this movement. Sakshi Malik she tweeted yesterday after being detained that they plan on returning to Jansan Mantar to continue their sit-ins. However, of course, now the police have said that they won't allow them there, so it remains to be seen how the movement will continue. The police is saying, we'll let it protest at some other site, but it's clearly a tactic meant to destroy the movement because we know that Jansan Mantar is in central Delhi. It is easily accessible. Now we don't know whether the police will allow them, but after the events of yesterday, people are even angrier and the support towards the wrestlers has only intensified. Women's groups, farmers groups, students, everyone stated that they will make the movement stronger and that they will not stop until these wrestlers get justice.
Right, Surangya, thanks a lot for joining us with that. For weeks, there were hectic discussions about the United States' debt obligations. The government sought higher limits on borrowings to repay debts, which on Sunday the Democrats and Republicans finally agreed on for 2 years. But the terms of the arrangement are harsh for ordinary Americans. The deal foresees cuts in Social Security spending, a near freeze on increases in expenditure, and demands for people to work more to justify some benefits. Defense spending is excluded from these cuts. There's a sunset clause for some cutbacks, but they kick in far off in 2030. Anish from People's Dispatch has the details of this development. Anish, thanks for joining us. Good to have you on Daily Debrief. Anish, what is the debt ceiling all about and how will it make a difference to the life of an ordinary American? Does it matter?
I mean, it definitely does, because if you look at it, the debt ceiling pretty much can cap spending, because if they do not increase the debt ceiling at this point, they cannot spend anymore after June 5th, which means that even the money that has already been allocated for various programs will not be spent. It will be stuck in like a limbo until they actually find a way to deal with their debts and also to service the debt to begin with. So even that might not be possible, and that can affect the economy as a whole. We're not just talking about stocks collapsing, we're talking about a proper economic recession. And so definitely it has a bigger implication, and we are talking about spending of all sorts. It's not just military and other stuff, but also like basic welfare, food stamps, unemployment guarantees, all of that will be affected. And that can actually have a big, repercussion in the long run, even. Like it can have long-term impact that will not be very easy to recover from. So the debt ceiling actually matters a lot. And they're already above it by 0.5%, if I'm not wrong. And they really need to get this sorted before June 5th. And that is something that it seems like they have managed. This sort of deal that they have come up with is something indicating that no matter how much the Republicans kind of threaten the government with not letting the ceiling go up or letting the debt lapse, they are not going to actually follow through with that kind of promise. It was the same that they did in 2011 under the Obama administration as well. And the kind of compromise is also quite similar to that period of time as well.
Right, Anish. Anish, it seems actually like a range of proposals, and there are a series of cuts, but there are also like these exemptions which they are making. So in the end, you end up with this sort of situation where are people going to be very upset about it? And does it seem increasingly like the Democrats and the Republicans are saying the same thing?
I mean, yes, in the way that the one thing that they all agreed on is that they're not going to touch the military budget. In fact, they're not even going to freeze the military budget from moving up. They're actually allowing a 3% increase in the budgetary allocation for defense over the next, I think maybe a year or two. So, and that is an annual rate increase, by the way. So this is definitely something that both the Republicans and the Democrats, and no matter what caucus you sit in, be it the sort of Freedom Caucus or the Progressive Democrats, all of them have actually been on the same page on that matter. So that is something that not only remained untouched, but it actually got a boost when you compare it to everything else. Like the non-defense spending is what that has been really stands to be affected at this point, which means that all sorts of proposal that whole range of Democrats were making when it comes to, say, unemployment guarantees, or for that matter, food stamps and other sort of welfare programs that were
Including the scholarship, including the loan waiver for students.
yeah, so the loan waiver and even all sorts of programs that were targeted to, say, older pensioners and stuff like that. All of that are going to remain the same for the next 2 years. They may not see any increase in their allocation. They will have to deal with whatever resources that which they're struggling with. Let's begin with that. They're also struggling in most of these departments that actually deal with such allocations are actually struggling already, and they're not going to see any kind of fund rise in the next year or so, until much after the next presidential election. So this is definitely one part of that whole thing. What you're also going to see is the freezing of this sort of social welfare guarantees is also something that they are going to extend into, say, health and Medicare and stuff like that. Medicaid, for instance, or Obamacare, as they keep saying all the time, is going to also not see any kind of fund increase when they actually need it. And we are also going to see about, I think it's something close to $60 billion of unused COVID fund, the counter-pandemic fund that was allocated in the previous administration, even under the Biden administration, that remain unused, is something we do not know what they're going to do with that. They're going to take that back. That is one part of the deal, but we do not know where it is going to be reallocated to or appropriated to. And that is, it clearly shows that pretty much any kind of expansion of welfare programs that is pretty much needed at a time like this is something that is not going to happen. There is also no kind of clause that actually deals with raising revenue or revenue sources, which means you'll have to tax corporates, you'll have to tax the upper classes of the society, and that is also not going to happen. We can be very sure of that. Despite all the talk that the Freedom Caucus, which is pretty much the most right-wing and of the Republican Party at the moment, the kind that the mainstream media often associates with being pro-Trump at the moment, and which was actually the main bloc that stymied the entire talks on debt ceiling raise, are pretty much they are pretty much on board with most of the proposals. To begin with, they do not want any kind of expansion of social programs. They want an increase in military spending, and definitely they do not want tax raises. And all that, and most of them actually came to that position by making all sorts of statements about how the elite are taking over, the elite are being parasitic and whatever, and pretty much they are the ones who are right now dealing with the most anti-poor, people kind of budgetary. It's not exactly a budgetary proposal, but this will affect all sorts of budgetary spending in the next year or so. And that shows that even they are really not concerned about what the masses go through. And the same goes with the progressive caucus within the Democratic Party, who have really not done much to actually make sure that some level of expansion or some wiggle room for social welfare would have happened. So this clearly shows that there is a sort of unity in the ruling class within the United States right now, which agree on a whole lot of things, and that includes that the military really needs to expand. The war machine needs to expand, but that has to happen at the cost of all sorts of spending for the people, and that really is something that we see with this deal right now.
Anish, and thanks a lot for joining us with that update, and I'm sure that we'll see by 5th June what exactly passes and what doesn't. And that's all we have on Daily Debrief for today. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. Our website, peoplesdispatch.org, has more such stories, and you can follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram.